I am so pumped up here to welcome my next guest, Matt Adams. You've heard him on at the host of Fairways of Life. You can get that on basically any platform. It's live on Twitter. You see it on YouTube. Anywhere you digest information, you can get the Fairways of Life. It is the only digital radio and digital television daily live golf talk show that immediately becomes a 24/7 on-demand podcast. This is really good stuff. This is Matt Adams. I've known him since 2013. We met at the Crosby Clam Bake at Pebble Beach, the AT&T, as many of us know. Matt, how are you today, my friend?
I'm well, Garrett. Thank you for having me on your show. It's ironic. I didn't know it. It's funny that you remembered that we met in 2013 at Pebble, at that tournament, because the club that I just grabbed the club. I do it all the time when I'm doing these sorts of interviews. It's more or less just a prop for me, but this one actually came from that event. I picked it up at that little shop that, you know, when you go down the stairs by the putting green, it was under one of those shops in that lower level, and he sold antique clubs, and this one for some reason chose me, and I picked it up. So anyway, connection.
Yes, Links to the Past, I believe, is the shop you're thinking of, my friend.
Oh, yeah.
Links to the Past. Kevin Streelman, who has, of course, has won the AT&T, the amateur pro-am portion with Larry Fitzgerald the last few years. That is his absolute favorite gift shop anywhere on earth. So even the players love shopping there. But yeah, let's get to this though. Every time I talk to you, Matt, there is such a conviction with which you speak, with which you move. When I see you at major championships, Ryder Cups, you are so no doubt in your mind about whatever it is you are pursuing in that moment. Like it emanates from your pores. Where does that come from, Matt?
It's probably from a good old-fashioned Irish chip on the shoulder. You know, a sense that if the door doesn't open in front of you, you know, you have to wedge your heel in there to keep it open, and then hit it with your shoulder. I didn't start out in broadcasting. I don't consider myself a professional broadcaster, which is odd, I guess, because I make my living doing it now. But my background and my education is business, and I worked in equipment manufacturing, and I worked on the green grass side of the game. I ran golf courses, and a lot of my career I spent turning around distressed golf courses. So it was through that kind of combination that I was able to get into doing media in earnest. It was through that combination that I was able to get into doing my writing, because half the year it was so cold and nasty that I couldn't do anything else. So I started to write, not even knowing that I was capable of it, really. So my philosophy has always been that I don't think I'm ever going to be the most talented at what I do. I've never really spent a lot of time worrying about that type of position, but I was always committed and am to say I'm not going to get outworked. And from that standpoint, it reminds me, I guess, of one of my heroes in Ben Hogan. And I don't think Hogan really worried about whether he was the best or not. He just knew that he would dig it out of the dirt and outwork him. And so I try as best I can to embrace that philosophy.
Yes. Well, you also talk about success a lot on your show, and about if you want to be a successful person, you have to surround yourself with successful people. And in this world of golf, for you, what has helped you? What people have helped you in that regard?
A lot of people have helped me. I mean, tons of people have helped me in that regard. I think back to the first PGA professional that I ever worked for. His name was Joe Matus. At the Lake Warramog Country Club in Washington, Connecticut. And this was a little 9-hole facility way up on the hills, because it's the foothills of the Berkshire Mountains. And I started working there when I was in high school, because my dad had moved the family to the Danbury, Connecticut area. And I started working there in high school all the way through college. And by the time I was in my sophomore year in college, I was assistant manager of the club. And so it gave me huge experience. It helped me from a credibility standpoint. When you go for another job, you've got that title that you can throw on there. But it was just amazing. And it was during a time in which we had great fun in what we were doing. I mean, you set up for a wedding and host a wedding, and it might go to 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And by, 6 or 6:30, you were putting the carts out for the round the next day. It was an amazing time, and it taught me a tremendous amount about the game. On the TV side, I think about Art and Norm Cummings, who were both prominent newspaper people in our community in Northwestern Connecticut. And they were the first two that I ever went to with the crazy idea of doing television golf. I mean, and what we modeled ours after was CBS, where you had the little picture-in-picture. So you had the player on the tee, and he hit the shot, and then the other camera would follow the ball to the hole. They hosted a number of different tournaments. One prominent one at the time was called the Greater New Milford Open. That was one of the towns in our region. And at that time, Garrett, the regional sports channels, literally called Sports Channel, were huge around the country. They were the primary regional holders of rights, whether you're talking about the Knicks or in some cases the baseball, maybe the Mets or what have you. The Yankees would often found their own network called Yes Network, and the Red Sox had New England Sports Network, of course. But some of those New England Sports Network was around, but Yes Network wasn't. So I took that show and I syndicated it to all of these regional sports channel networks. And that experience, when I graduated from college, got me to ESPN, and I learned production and loved it. But the call of the game was too much, and I went back and worked I moved to Florida and worked in equipment manufacturing and learned a whole new business, which kind of tapped into my education and my accounting background as well. And I did that for many years and ended up working for Northwestern Golf in Chicago. And we built clubs at both places, private label manufacturing, for names that are now gone, but a Slot Line. We did Arnold Palmer's clubs called Peerless. We did Nicholas clubs. We did Lynx. We did McGregor. We did Ram. We did Wilson. I mean, I've built for so many different companies over the years in this private label manufacturing, big, large production runs. That was my experience there. And then I jumped back into the green grass side of the game again, which is exactly what I was doing before a guy named Chris Castleberry believed, and David Logue from the PGA Tour believed that they wanted to have an interview show. And at that point, I was already writing. I'd already started writing for a book series called Chicken Soup for the Soul, and the guy who got me started there was named Jack Canfield. That whole experience led me to doing the broadcasting side. And I'd had experience with it because I've been doing the PGA show for Golf Channel. And in the early days when Golf Channel started, I was in Orlando, so they used to bring me in. So I was familiar with talking to a camera and, kind of formulating your thoughts in that medium. And all of that kind of led to the green grass side, as I said, and that led to the media side. And then I was working originally for Chris for XM Radio. And XM Radio, it was called PGA Tour Network. XM Radio got purchased by Sirius. And so all new management came in, and they were New York-based people. And I went up and saw them in New York because, remember, I wasn't very far from that where I was from my high school years, and took the train in and sat down with them. And they were trying to figure out what they were going to do with a new block of programming. And they said, hey, could you host a daily morning show for us? And I said, sure, but I have to be done by 9 a.m. because I have to be at work. I have to be at the golf course and get people out on the course. And that's the reason why everything I do to this day is a morning show, because of what I considered my real job, and it was at the time, getting people out on the golf course. And that was the last club job that I had, was called Newport National. That was a place. And I worked for an owner named David Allen. He has since sold that facility as well. And I've loved it. I wouldn't change one step along the way. Like everybody else, you have your frustrations, you have your hopes that things will happen. And then you know, when my show kind of took off, why I don't know, but it did. And right around 13, 14, conversations started with other media companies, and one of them was Golf Channel. And by 14, Golf Channel had me doing stuff in there. By 15, I formally signed a contract with them. In fact, ironically, I signed it at the Open at St. Andrews, which was a pretty cool place to you know, physically put ink to paper. And so I've been with Golf Channel too ever since that time, kind of combining these various elements of my background. And the Fairways of Life show that you mentioned that I started, you know, back in 2006, I took it off satellite radio and syndicated it myself around the world using Spotify and TuneIn and iTunes. And it was doing really well as an audio product, but there's so much new technology that exists in the marketplace now. And with the pandemic, we built all of this. I'm actually sitting in my television studio, and this is where I originate now all of my Golf Channel content, including the equipment segments that I do for them. And it's where I broadcast the Fairways of Life show every day around the world on the television side as well. So it's been a really cool ride and a really fun ride. And with everything that's going on with the technology in the game, and I'm not talking about equipment technology, I'm talking about broadcast technology surrounding the game of golf, surrounding the game of life. I think it's just going to continue to diversify and grow, and people like yourself that are doing shows like this podcast, it's going to make it very easy. It's going to become like a huge a la carte menu, I think, for people to choose what they want. And the most important thing to me, however, was that they could get the Fairways of Life show where they wanted to, how they wanted to, when they wanted to, always available for free and always available anywhere around the world. That was the foundation of why we did it and how we did it. And we're very fortunate that it's worked.
Yes. Well, and a huge part of, I think, the success of Fairways of Life is your interview style. And just, you've been called the best interviewer in golf by Gary Player and so many big names in the past. What is it for you in your interviews that you're really trying to show your listeners?
I don't have any particular agenda, in fairness. I think interviewing for me is not so much about what questions you ask. It's about listening to what the interviewee tells you. And my personal philosophy when it comes to interviews is that if you listen, the person that you are interviewing will always tell you where they want to go next. They'll always leave you a crumb that will lead you to the next question. And I think when it comes to players in particular, and even legends in golf and so forth, because I think we've done over 10,000 interviews now for Fairways of Life. So that's why I always kind of smile when people tell me I'm a great interviewer. And I kind of think to myself, well, hopefully I've picked up something along the way, because we've done so many of them, but I'm sure I've done some awful ones too. But when it comes to players and legends like that, my hope is that we can show them as human beings so people can get to know them, and that I don't care what you do. I don't care how big a star you are or how successful you are. You've had the same things happen to you on a human level that happen to everybody else. You have your hopes, you have your dreams, you have the things that you worry about. You have issues with life. You have your children that you need to look after and take care of. And so I always think that if I can get these stars to tell us their story in their words about how they got to where they are, and make everyone realize that they're really no different than we are. They just have an incredible skill that they have honed and talent that they've been blessed with, that they were able to take to this grand stage. And I think that if I had an approach, I suppose that would be it.
Yes. Well, these legends and these players, you had spent so much time on your book about them. Of course, the golf round I'll never forget. 50 of golf's biggest stars recall their finest moments. One of your 12 books you published, Matt. What stands out from those interviews? Are there a couple moments that stand out that's like, wow?
Yeah. In all those interviews, there's really, I would say there's two that stand out to me as I would say at top of the vine. The first one was with Charlie Sifford, and the second one was with Arnold Palmer. And the reason I mention that now is because, ironically, they're both with the exact same age. They were 86 years old when they conducted these two respective interviews that stand out in my mind. Both of them had been on with us a number of times over the years, but these two particular ones, both of which you still can find to this day, if you did a search online, you're going to find them. And Charlie Sifford's interview was incredibly emotionally powerful, because here you had this man who was in failing health, in fairness, and you could hear in his voice the pain of what he endured. I asked him about whether he realized that he was the Jackie Robinson of golf, to have broken the color barrier. And he never really accepted that acclaim. He didn't deny it, but he never really accepted it, because to him, he wasn't playing golf to forge a path. He wasn't playing golf to be heroic. He was playing golf because he loved it. And he told stories about leading tournaments and getting phone calls in his hotel room and being told that if he showed up at the course the next day, he would be murdered. But he carried on, and he showed up the next day with a cigar in mouth and said, well, if you're going to murder me, you're going to murder me, but I'm going to go there and play golf. And he spoke at great length about, remember, when he got on the tour, there was a clause in the PGA that said that it was an only Caucasian clause. And so he had to take action to get on tour. And by the time he did, the real prime of his playing days had passed him, yet he still won 2 times while he was on the PGA Tour. And it hurt him tremendously that he was never able to play at Augusta National. And he told specifically the story of leading an event and coming in the next day. I believe he led it through 2 or 3 rounds at this point. I believe it was through 3, if memory serves. And the next day there was a sign that said the winner of the tournament this year will not receive an invitation to the Masters. And he really was, it pained him tremendously that he was barred from doing what he rightfully deserved to do by measure of anyone else because of the color of his skin. But ultimately the story was a heroic one, in my view, in my definition, because of what he did. And I believe he did forge a path for others to follow, with Lee Elder playing for the first time in Augusta, in particular in 1975. Tiger Woods spoke often about these forerunners to him on tour and what it meant. Well, it wouldn't have happened when it happened had it not been for Charlie Sifford, and that one stands out dramatically to me. It's very emotional too, and it's if you get a chance, Garrett, it's well worth listening. The Arnold Palmer one was different for other reasons. He too was not in good health. We believe that interview was the last long-form sit-down interview that Mr. Palmer ever did. And just to give you a reflection of the man, we were in this tiny little house. It sits alongside of the 18th green at Bay Hill in Orlando. And we had gotten there, obviously early, and we'd set the cameras up, and we only had one camera, and we had a train just on the seat that Mr. Palmer would be sitting in. And, we just waited in the galley area of this little tiny home. And then we could hear the doorknob moving and slowly opening, and where the sun was hitting the door fresh in the morning, as the door opened, the light came through the crack like a laser beam, and shortly thereafter, it silhouetted and outlined the unmistakable form of Arnold Palmer. Now, this was after he had slipped on the throw rug and after he had dislocated his shoulder, which really started his physical decline that ultimately concluded with the end of his mortal frame. And he shuffled his way down the hallway, and frankly, it kind of seemed like he needed some help, but none of us dare ask the man if he needed help, because we knew he wouldn't accept it. And he sat down in this big, kind of regal-looking high-back chair and went, oh. And he looked around. Now, here's a guy even then who was still making $25, $30 million a year in endorsements. And he looked around at this tiny house that it definitely had one bedroom. It may have had a second one, but if it did, it was the size of a closet. And the area where you would eat was clearly one time an outside sitting area, a patio, because it still had the slate on the ground and they enclosed it. So it gave it a tiny bit more space. And so he looked around and he said, do you know, I used to live in this house. And again, kind of looked about the room and he said, I'm thinking about moving back here again. And it was just remarkable to me that this man that had accomplished so much and was so critically important to the game as we know it today, from the original concept of the modern Grand Slam, the professional Grand Slam, for what he did to the Open and bringing it back into prominence, for what he did with Arnie's Armies, to being the matinee style, cast in the starring role right as television discovered the game of golf, all of these things and many, many more. To think that as he was sitting here in his dotage, to look around that room with the humility of saying, you know, he'd be so happy to live in this tiny little house when he deserved to live in a castle.
No, definitely the king. So much he's done. Of course, at Bay Hill, I remember that last 2016 Bay Hill when he was alive. He followed his grandson for that Friday afternoon, and Sam Saunders was tied for the lead. Peter Jacobson, I just spoke with Peter, and Peter was out there in the cart with Kit, Arnie's wife, and they were all just, it was such a special moment. Matt, I'm going to write a couple stories, if I can give it justice, that moment that it was, Arnie and the pride he had for Sam Saunders, his grandson. What a moment. I want to get to another thing. Of course, there's so much to talk about with Mr. Palmer, but I want to get to the Ryder Cup and the passion for it. I believe, we're going to wrap up here in the next 3 or 4 minutes, but I believe that the Ryder Cup Europe is in the top 2 greatest stories in golf for the last quarter century. There's just no doubt in my mind what the magnitude, the importance of Seve and what that meant, especially in 2012, winning in America, coming back the way they did. American fans look at it as, oh, they just can't get out of their own head and say, oh, we lost. It's not a great event. We lost. No, it is a phenomenal event. Tell us, Matt, what your thoughts are on what Team Europe has done.
Well, I credit Tony Jacklin as, ironically, I'm going to use an American term in person in St. George, Washington, but Tony Jacklin is the equivalent for the Ryder Cup, because he, who was a recipient of the concession in 1969 from Jack Nicklaus, was the guy that rebuilt the Ryder Cup and made it what it is today. When they went to him as captain, he said, look, I'm not going to do it unless. And he wanted the things that were equivalent to what the American team had, the uniforms, the travel, the team rooms, all of these things and more. One of the things that he needed to get back on that side, this now combined European team, the first one was, in fairness, in 1979, and they were soundly beat as a combined European team. But he needed to get Seve back in the fold of the Ryder Cup, because Seve was done with the Ryder Cup, and very few people realize that. Tony Jacklin was the guy that went to him and put his arm around him and said, I cannot do this without you. And Seve didn't want to come back. He felt like he was slighted for a variety of different reasons. And through talking about it and Tony Jacklin saying, look, I've gone through some bumps in the road too with the European Tour, but we can do something special here. And he said that Seve said to him, I will help you. And he did help him in every way. You were talking about the first win in American soil, which was in 1987, but they nearly won in 1983, save for the heroics of Lanny Watkins down at PGA in West Palm. So it's an incredible story of an event that is so big now. If you look at a Ryder Cup compared to anything else, even a major, it absolutely swamps it in terms of size and stature. I'm talking about corporate chalets. I'm talking about the number of people that want to attend the events, the overall pitch, the overall volume, the overall excitement, and all of that which is consumed by people around the world. It is an absolutely incredible event. And the one thing I recommend to people, if you can get to something, get to a Ryder Cup. I think you should go to a Ryder Cup in Europe because it's incredibly unique, but any Ryder Cup is good to go to. Even the ones in the United States are a great deal of fun. But if there's, I know a lot of people would probably say they'd want to go to the Masters, and rightfully so, and I respect and appreciate that too. But Ryder Cups are a different animal. They're just different than anything else, and they're tons of fun.
Yes. In 30 seconds, I know you love Ireland. Get to events, get to events. But why do my listeners, golf fans, need to get to Ireland in 30 seconds?
Because Ireland is unprotected from the ravages of the Atlantic Ocean. Unlike Scotland, which has great links golf courses, it has Ireland to protect it from the angry sea. So when you have millions and millions and millions of years of the ocean pounding into the landmass, the dune structure, the huge mountains of dunes or plummeting valleys are such that it's links golf that is better than and different than anywhere else in the world. So if you love the game of golf and you love links golf in particular, you will be amazed by what you'll find in Ireland. And that I'm 100% convinced of.
Great stuff. Matt Adams, you can follow him on Twitter at Matt Adams, FOL, for Fairways of Life. He is such an icon, and he's so approachable too. He loves to, happy to help younger people like myself in media. So really enjoyed our friendship. And we've met at 3 Open Championships, 2015, 16, and 17. We've got conversations around the world. I always value our friendship, Matt.
Yeah, likewise, Garrett. Good luck with everything you're doing, and just remember, keep your head down. Don't listen to the noise.